Good evening. My name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and I am going to talk about the United States of America, the condition that it's in today, how it got here, and where it looks like we're going to be going in the future, in the very near future. Yesterday I received an email from an 8th grader, and it was very well written. It was probably better written than most high school seniors could do it. He may have had some help, but I don't think so. He's from a middle school in New Hampshire, and he said that he was contacting me because of his school project. That each one of the students had been given a subject, and they were supposed to find an expert on the subject and report back on it. And this young man said that the subject he had picked was the 2008 financial collapse. And he said that he started looking around for experts. And he couldn't find anybody because he wanted to find out really what had happened here. And he realized that nobody saw it coming. I mean, he was in the 6th grade when this happened. He was in the 5th grade when this happened, and nobody saw it coming. And then he said, "Dear sir, I discovered you. And you saw this happening before other people saw it happening, and I would like to interview you for my school project." And so what I did is I went back through some of my material to see if I could send him an article on, that dealt with this. And so I sent him two, but the most pertinent one was something I had written in June of 2007. Now, the financial collapse that this young man was talking about happened 15 months later, in September and October of 2008. I had posted this article on the web in June 2007, and it was entitled, "D is for Dominance, Debt, and Depression. Sell dreams on credit, you'll make a fortune on the interest." And I thought about what this young man wanted and how to frame this in a way that was understandable to him and the questions that he wanted answered. And it occurred to me this evening that perhaps something he should look at is to present it this way. He's about to enter high school, all right? He's in the 8th grade now. He's going to enter high school. And let's say that he found out somehow that the high school cafeteria was run by a candy maker, all right, a local candy maker, somebody who sold, Mars bars and Hershey bars and chewing gum and Coca-Cola, candy maker, all right. And this person had somehow got the concession for running the school cafeteria at the high school he was going to attend. Now, I would think that it wouldn't take a lot of foresight to come to the conclusion that at the end of those 4 years, most of those students are going to have very high levels they're going to be on a course to develop diabetes later in life. They don't also have them then at that time. And their teeth are going to be filled with cavities. Because this is what just happens when you get a high school cafeteria that's run by candy makers. Well, what happens if you have an economy run by bankers? It's pretty much the same thing. Because candy makers make money by selling candy. Bankers make money by giving loans. That's how bankers make money. They make loans, they collect the interest on those loans, and then what investment bankers do is they sell those loans to others as an investment. This is what bankers do. So to answer that young man's question about how we got here, how we got to the 2008 collapse, that is the key right there. We have bankers in charge of the economy, people who make money by making loans. It stands to reason that the net result of an economy run by bankers is analogous to the net result of a school cafeteria run by candy makers. Instead of diabetes and cavities, we have unpayable levels of debt by government, by consumers, and by businesses. Now, This has been going on so long, people go, well, isn't that the way things are? This is just reality. This is like thinking, well, don't we get a candy bar for breakfast? And don't we get 2 candy bars for lunch and 3 candy bars for dinner? Because it's always been that way at the high school cafeteria. Hasn't it always been this way, that we borrow money to go to school? We borrow money to pay our bills? We borrow money to get through life? No, it hasn't. It was never this way, at least until 1913. And it wasn't even that way then. What happened in 1913 is the groundwork for what we have now began. When this country, this wonderful, extraordinary country called the United States of America, came into being in 1776, it was truly an extraordinary effort, a move by just ordinary citizens to strike out on their own, to not be told what to do, to have freedom in their personal lives, in their economy, in just freedom of choice. This is what America stood for. This is the same thing that those in the Middle East are looking for now. They're looking for basic freedoms. All right? This is the same thing that lit France up in the mid-18th century when they overthrew the monarchy. They too were looking for freedoms. Well, when the Founding Fathers created the United States of America, they wanted economic freedom as well. What we call the Boston Tea Party was against unjust taxation. All right? And they were revolting against the rule of law instituted by their overseers, who was the government of England. All right? Now, the government of England had already, in 1776, when the United States revolted, already had candy makers in charge of their diet. They already had bankers in charge of their economy. In fact, England was the first country in the world to do so. Before 1695, before the Bank of England came into existence, England, like the rest of the world, the money was composed of gold and silver, something of value that you could exchange for your work, your labor, or your value that you knew had value. All right? Before 1695, this is the way the world ran. It ran this way in Europe, it ran this way in Asia, it ran this way in Africa. There was different denominations, different coins that were used, but everybody knew. You could take a trader from the Far East and he'd go over to the East and he'd want to buy stuff, and they would demand payment in gold or silver species. Okay? But what happened in England changed all of that. And it changed it in an extraordinary way. The bankers got in control of the money of England in 1695. Now, let's go back to basics. How do bankers make money? Well, bankers make money the same way in their field that candy makers make money in their field. Candy makers make money by selling candy. Bankers make money by selling you a loan. All right? So what they did was this. They went to the King of England, who was heavily indebted. He had been fighting wars with the continent. All right? All the kings at that time were just going, at each other's throat, trying to sleep with each other's wives and cousins to get more territory. And if that didn't work, then you sent your fleet over there and you'd blow them out, or they blew you out. And for hundreds of years, this was Europe's history. Well, the bankers changed all that. It was extraordinary how they got in. King William III owed huge amounts of money from his war with France. He was in debt. The bankers came to him and made him an offer. They said, if you let us issue the money of England, if you let us issue the money of England as a bank. Now, I want to tell you, before the Bank of England existed in 1600, there was no such things as banks. Banks didn't exist. The word bank itself is derived from the Jewish word bank, which describes the benches that Jewish goldsmiths used to sit on when people who needed loans would come by and, wheel and deal and try and get a loan to do this or loan to do that. There wasn't a lot of credit floating around before the Bank of England came into being in 1695. But that's where the word came from. There were no freestanding banks. They didn't have huge buildings. They didn't have offices. They shared a little space and they ran their little mom and pop businesses. And if you were really rich, then you had a bigger mom and pop business, but it was still run like that. So they made an offer to the King of England. And they said, if you let us issue your money, England's money, we will loan you that money, pay off your debts, and any wars you want to fight, hey, come to us. We'll finance them. Well, the King of England, it was a deal that he couldn't resist. No one had ever made this deal before, offer. I mean, this offer had never been made in the whole history of humanity. He could pay off his debts, and he could fight war on the come. He could fight war on credit. Nobody could fight war on credit. And I want to tell you something. War is one of the most expensive endeavors in human enterprise. People die. It chews up resources. Families are destroyed. Farmland is wiped out. It's very, very expensive. Now, to the spoils, the victors go. To the victor, the spoils go. So what was extraordinary about this deal was the King of England made this deal with the Bank of England. Bank of England, first central bank in the world, in fact, the first real huge bank in the world, sat there and started putting out paper money instead of gold and silver coins. Paper money to the people in England. Now, what did the English do? Money before this time was always gold and silver. Somebody comes out printing paper money. So the British are rather enterprising people. Some of them got around and said, hey, we can print this stuff as well as they can. So they started printing money themselves. Well, to ensure the monopoly worked, you had to make sure it was a monopoly. So with the backing of the King of England, who was all too happy to back up the bankers because he was able to go to war on credit, they cut off the heads of counterfeiters and stuck their heads all around England and Poles. Counterfeiting dropped. All right? Counterfeiting dropped. So what the bank was able to do was start printing these pieces of money that was considered money anywhere in England. All right? You couldn't take this to France and spend it. They'd laugh at you. You couldn't take it outside. But in England, you could do it. All right? This was money. Had the king's stamp on it and stuff like that. All right? So you could take it as money. Now, why did they want to do this instead of the regular old way of banking and lending money? Because when they used to lend gold and silver is very expensive. So let's say they're sitting there, the King of England wants to pay off his debts, so you got to go out and get the gold and silver first, loan it to him, and then he pays you back in gold and silver. What was done with the absolute extraordinary invention of paper money is that the bankers were able to loan paper, not gold and silver, paper, coupons with writing on it, all right? Hand them out as real money, and then you had to come back, pay them back more money, okay? And that's how they made their profit. So the bankers were able to all of a sudden, it's like a candy maker, instead of coming up with so much sugar and making 1,000 bars, all of a sudden with 1,000 pounds of sugar, instead of making 1,000, let's say 10,000, let's say a candy maker had 1,000 pounds of sugar and he transformed that into 100,000 candy bars. If all of a sudden that candy maker with that same 1,000 pounds of sugar could issue 1,000,000 candy bars, that would be called fractional reserve candy making. And this is what the British did. This is what the bankers did in England. Now, what happened is the money went out, everybody liked a sugar rush, everybody liked that money floating around, and enterprise started to boom until it slowed down. Why? Because it's like a sugar rush, a credit rush does the same thing. A sugar rush is temporary, gets everybody jacked up, everybody's going around, everybody's happy, then after a while, well, it was temporary, it was artificial. So that boom of expansion in the economy was artificial, and a recession would happen. A business slowdown would happen. Well, when this happened, people started going broke. They went broke. But the bankers had not loaned this money just gratis. They made sure that if you went broke and couldn't pay the loan back, they got your house. They could throw you in debtor's prison. They could do all sorts of things. But they covered their ass, loaning you pieces of paper that had no value at all. Oh, no, they did have some. On it, it said you could exchange this for gold or silver at the Bank of England. Because you had to do this. Because they were running a confidence game. They had to make people feel confident about those pieces of paper. And if they didn't feel confident about that piece of paper, the game was over. So they said on that piece of paper, this piece of paper can be exchanged at the Bank of England for blah, 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 ounce of silver or whatever it was backed for, okay? And it was true. If you took that piece of paper in, you could get an ounce of silver for it. But the truth of the matter is, what the bankers knew is very few people would do it. As long as they trusted that piece of paper, they could print as much paper as they could, and nobody would come in sufficient numbers to bankrupt the bank. And if they did, it was called a bank run. All right? When people got nervous out there and there was a bank run, all of a sudden everybody comes in with their pieces of paper to get the gold and silver that's in the bank that's supposedly backing these coupons, and lo and behold, the banks never had enough gold and silver. They were running a Ponzi scheme. They're running a confidence scheme, basically, on people. All right? But as long as the pressure, as long as it never hit a critical mass, everybody was happy, especially government, which was able to borrow huge amounts of money, and especially the bankers. Now, this is what England was doing. Thomas Jefferson, the founding father, one of the founding fathers of the United States, knew exactly what England was doing. This is why they had the revolution in the United States, against the English banking system, against taxation, against the forcing of them on this specie money that made them toil and never get ahead because everybody was going to be in debt. Thomas Jefferson said this: the people of England are, like them, must labor 16 hours of the 24 hours in a day, and give the earnings of 15 of these hours to the government for their debts and daily expenses. What happens is, this is the tendency of all human governments. And if we depart from this principle in one case, it'll become a precedent for a second case, and the third, until the bulk of society is reduced to being mere automatons of misery, to have no sensibilities left but to toil to pay off their debts. Well, he wrote those words in the early 1800s. He said he warned this as a danger that could happen to America if we allowed private bankers to issue money in the United States as they did in England. Well, they do. They do. In 1913, the private bank of the Bank of England was instituted in the United States. Not the same bank, but everything that the Bank of England did in England became law in the United States when the Federal Reserve, a group of private banks, took over government, basically a financial coup, all right, and started issuing money, U.S. currency, in the United States. Before this time, all the money issued in the United States was issued by the U.S. Treasury. That was the purpose of the Treasury. Dollar bills issued by the U.S. government. In probably what is the first act of government privatization, the bankers privatized the issuance of money. And they'll tell you, oh, privatization is wonderful. Government's down the tube. Certainly government has problems. But their smokescreen to this country is, we do it better. We do it better. Private people do it better than the public. Well, in many instances they do. But what people forget, because they don't want you to think about it, is that private people aren't doing it for the public. The public people are supposed to do it for the public, but private people don't owe anything to the public. They only do it for themselves. They may come in here under the guise of helping the country, we're going to do this for you, but it's never to help you, it's always to help themselves. So in 1913, when the United States Treasury was shoved aside by the Federal Reserve, this terrible thing of modern banking, which is called capitalism, is capital. Capital is the use of fake money. Essentially, it's British capital. It's not real money. Real money is gold and silver. Capital is paper-backed coupons issued by a central bank. And the closer you are to the issuance of that capital, to that credit, the better off you are. So the investment boys, the bankers, the banks, they make bank. The laborers, everybody else down the line, the pensioners, you work just as hard, but you can never catch up again. And that is why the United States is now in the condition that it's in. It's not even been 100 years since the Federal Reserve took over the issuance of money, specie in the United States. And we have more debts than will ever be paid back. We can never pay these debts back. The US dollar is a worthless coupon. It is not backed by gold or silver. It has not been backed by gold or silver for decades, since 1971. And even before then, private citizens couldn't turn in those pieces of paper. But the confidence game worked. Everybody walking around takes out those bills. You can pay something. You can buy something with it. But I can guarantee you, you can't buy as much next year as you can this year. Remember Motel 6? For those of you old enough, I'm 66. Motel 6 came of age in the 60s and 70s. It was a motel chain. Proudly, $6 was their room. All across the United States, Motel 6, famous, $6 room. Well, when I wrote my book in 2007, I checked on the average prices of Motel 6. They were well above $60. So what we had, basically, was an increase, a tenfold increase in inflation during that time. But it's like Chinese water torture. The inflation, as long as it's kept below a certain level, you never know it's going on. They have that metaphor of the boiling frog, that if you tossed a frog in a pot of boiling water, the frog would jump out. He would know that his life is in danger. He would just immediately jump out. But if you put a frog in a pot of water and turned on the heat slowly, the frog would just die. He would never notice that it was that hot because it happened gradually. So this is what happened to the United States of America. This is what the question that young man in the 8th grade asked me. How did we come here? What did we happen? How did this happen? This article that I wrote in June of 2007, I ended with this. Today, the U.S. economy is a dead man walking, a term used to describe those condemned to death but still alive. Like the movies, the scene has now been set. Events have transpired that will determine the outcome. And although the exact ending is not yet known, the end itself is inevitable. The amount of debt owed by the U.S. government and its citizens can never be repaid. In today's modern banking system, debt money is constantly fed into the system until debt levels reach such heights, debts cannot be serviced or retired. At that point, the system will begin to collapse. This is where we are today. The coming collapse may be triggered by a run on the U.S. dollar, once backed by gold but is now an irredeemable piece of paper whose only value is determined by speculators. Or it may be triggered by the failure of an over-leveraged hedge fund, or the inability of a large money center bank suddenly unable to meet its obligations. But irregardless of what triggers the coming collapse, the collapse will result from our worldwide modern banking system, a system whereby governments allow private bankers to issue debt as money in order to further the insatiable ambitions of those who govern. The United States is the largest military force in the world. We are heir to King William's insatiable ambitions, and it's been fed by the bankers. Bankers don't really care about war. They care about the profits that war makes for them. They care about the debts, the interest that government pays on the money loaned by the banking system back into the governments. And what happened to America? Well, I recently thought of a metaphor of this country. It's like a man in a bar. Used to be strong, powerful, young, and vibrant, and now he's overweight, skin is sallow. He's not the person he was. And he's sitting there drinking at that bar. He's got cirrhosis of the liver. He's been addicted to drink for years. And he's sitting there thinking about it. And he doesn't like the condition that he's in. He remembers a different era. And he sits there, drinking his drink and staring into it. His anger sweeps through him. He's angry at the Mexican busboy. He's angry at the Chinese bartender. And he's angry at the black manager of the bar. But he's never angry at who owns the bar. The Federal Reserve. The bankers that put him there. The bankers that when he tries to get off that stool, they give him 3 more drinks. When he tries to clean up, they have his friends come over and give him more. And he sits there not knowing what to do. He's a victim of his addiction to credit. He's a victim of the bankers. And he's a victim of his own ambitions. If this country is going to change, that man, America, is going to have to get out of the bar. It's going to be costly. It's not going to be easy. But it's got to happen. Otherwise, I think everybody knows what the result will be.